The iQOO 13 is one of the first Snapdragon 8 Elite powered smartphones to launch in the global market, and it is the first 8 Elite powered phone I've had my hands on, so I'm extremely excited to see how it performs. In the box you'll find the device itself, a clear silicone case, a 6 amp charging cable, and a 120 watt charging block. The iQOO 13 has already released in Indonesia, India, Thailand, and Malaysia, and it's only slightly more expensive than last year's iQOO 12. It's the cheapest in Indonesia, starting at around $630, which is significantly cheaper than most other top-tier flagships. There are a lot of upgrades this year, and some minor downgrades, which we'll get to a little later on. But since this is the first Snapdragon 8 Elite device I've had in the studio, we just have to start with performance. The new flagship Qualcomm chip does away with efficiency cores in favor of a new 3nm TSMC architecture, which boasts 2 prime cores clocked at 4.32 GHz and 6 performance cores at 3.53 GHz. That's significantly faster than last year's 3.3 GHz max frequency, and is said to be about 45% more powerful. There's also a new integrated Adreno 830 GPU, which comes in at 1.1 GHz and jumps up performance by 40%. This is all paired alongside iQOO's latest supercomputing Q2 gaming chipset, as well as up to 16 gigs of LPDDR5X RAM and 512 gigs of newer UFS 4.1 storage. So naturally, benchmark scores are rather ludicrous. It managed 2.85 million points in Antutu version 10, which is much higher than its predecessor's score and slightly better than MediaTek's new Dimensity 9400 CPU. It's a similar case with Geekbench 6 in terms of single and multi-core performance, and while it continued to show flames in 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme and Steel Nomad Lite benchmark tests, it fell short of the Dimensity 9400 chip when it comes to Solar Bay, which means MediaTek's latest CPU is slightly ahead in terms of ray tracing. So benchmarks are great, and hardware is very impressive on paper, but how does it actually game? Well, that dedicated gaming chip should help quite a bit, considering it can reduce power consumption, boost frame rates, upscale resolution, and even prevent screen tearing with some games. But that list of games is very small. I mean, I only have a handful of installed games that can use these features. Thankfully, Genshin Impact is one of those games, and my goodness, it works well. If you drag the slider in from the left, you can of course enable Monster Mode for max performance, but if you tap on Game Tools and tap on Super Resolution, it's insane how much clearer things are when set to high as opposed to original. And ultra high quality goes even further by adding in extra detail. Of course, in-game, all the graphics settings have been set to their absolute max, and even when running on ultra high Super Resolution, we averaged a stable 60 FPS the entire time. But running Genshin on maxed out settings and averaging 60 FPS, which is the FPS limit of this game by the way, isn't exactly surprising, considering the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 could do the same. But of course, if there was no 60 FPS cap on this game, then there would no doubt be a difference, which will make sense soon. However, with the iQOO 13, there is a frame rate boost feature, which can jump up your frame rate to a max of 144 FPS. Just let that sink in for a second. That said, ultra-high super resolution doesn't work with frame rate boost enabled, but the good news is that high quality does, which to me looks almost as good as ultra-high resolution. Ultra-high does lead to a bit of input lag anyway, so high seems to be the sweet spot, and it works with the frame boost mode, so it's a no-brainer. When set to high super res mode and frame rate boost mode, the iQOO 13 averaged 144 FPS without any FPS drops or stutters, and I was absolutely blown away by this. But you have to remember that this feature is using something called frame interpolation, which is a video processing technique that generates new frames between existing ones to create smoother motion. So it's not exactly true 144 FPS, if that makes sense. But it does feel a hell of a lot smoother. With Call of Duty Mobile, we managed an average of 120 FPS, which is the FPS limit for this game. And while frame interpolation is available for this game, no matter what I tried, it didn't work. I changed the in-game frame rate to 60 and interpolation wouldn't work. I set it to 90 FPS and interpolation didn't work, and I really thought it would because to interpolate COD Mobile, you need to set it to 90 FPS, then the feature will drop it to 72 FPS, and then interpolate it to 144 FPS. But to be honest, it really isn't a big deal, as I'd rather play at native 120 FPS than interpolate at 144 FPS. Now of course, the previous Qualcomm flagship chipsets had no issues averaging 120 FPS as well, so the new CPU won't really change your Call of Duty Mobile experience. However, Call of Duty also allows for game super resolution, but unlike Genshin, there's no ultra high mode, only high quality mode, which is fine, but the adjustment of detail isn't as pronounced as it was in Genshin Impact. That said, it is still a noticeable bump in resolution, and it's certainly nice to have in this game since you can only use medium graphics when setting Call of Duty to ultra frame rate mode. So at least this way you can get a better looking game while hitting 120 frames per second. So other than iQOO's incredible in-house gaming features, games like Genshin Impact and Call of Duty Mobile don't really run any better than the previous Snapdragon chip, but that's because they can't, because they already peaked with the last generation set of chipsets. But there are more demanding games out there that can seriously push mobile gaming to its absolute limit. The new Call of Duty Warzone Mobile is not just another version of COD Mobile. Its graphics are actually ported from consoles, so it's much more demanding to play. And while it doesn't benefit from iQOO's super resolution and frame boost features, it does perform exceptionally well thanks to the new 8 Elite chipset. We averaged around 71 FPS while playing Mosh Pit mode, with ups and downs all the time, but I never experienced any screen tearing thanks to iQOO's supercomputing chipset, so at least it has that going for it. It doesn't look as crisp as COD Mobile because the game isn't really well optimized, but that average 71 FPS was achieved with all graphical settings set to their max, including peak visual quality, which Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 powered smartphones could only do at around 50 frames per second. So this is a major improvement over the previous Qualcomm chip. Wuthering Waves has only been out for a few months and it's already been crowned as the benchmark for mobile gaming, and my goodness does it look incredible. It has so many graphics settings to tweak, so naturally we threw everything on the max, and we averaged 60 FPS the whole time playing, which again is the FPS cap of this game. We experienced no frame drops or stutters at all, and to give you a bit of an idea of how demanding this game is to play, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 could only push around 40 FPS with maxed out settings, so if you're looking to future-proof your mobile gaming experience, then Qualcomm's new chip is certainly worth the upgrade. The game also can't use iQOO's super resolution and frame interpolation features, but all games can use the direct drive power supply feature, also known as charge bypass, which allows the phone to draw power directly from its charger instead of its battery. Your battery level will stay the same and your battery won't heat up. Speaking about heat, the iQOO 13 also packs in a newly upgraded 7K Ultra Vapor Chamber cooling system, which in my experience works exceptionally well. The device did get a bit warm, which is completely normal, but after playing for a couple of hours it stayed that way, and never got too hot to hold, never throttled, overheated, or kicked me out of my gaming session, which is something that's happened with past chipsets from Qualcomm. Another noteworthy upgrade is the new 1016H ultra-wide vibration motor, which allows you to feel every vibration in-game as accurately as possible, and also makes for some very good haptic feedback when using the phone on the daily. The USB-C port has now been upgraded to USB 3.2, which is awesome. It still has an IR blaster, Bluetooth 5.4, dual SIM 5G, but still no eSIM support, and Wi-Fi 7. But NFC has been upgraded to 360-degree NFC, so it works all around the phone, and the dual speaker system has improved too, thanks to it using a larger top speaker found in the earpiece, and it now sounds a lot more balanced.
Let me be your blade.
Another upgrade, wait, these upgrades are starting to get a bit ridiculous now, but another upgrade is battery, because this thing has a massive 6,150 milliamp hour capacity, which is A huge improvement over last year's 5000 mAh cell. But wide charging has remained the same, but that's actually a good thing since it sits at a very fast 120 watts. But I must say I was really hoping to see wireless charging this year. I guess they kinda have to make some cutbacks in order to keep the price down. The iQOO 13 comes in 3 different colors. There's Legend, which is white with BMW M branding, Nardo Grey, which is based on the racing test track in Italy, and Alpha, which is black with glass fiber material. The overall design looks identical to last year's iQOO 12, but if you look closely, you'll notice an RGB LED ring wrapping around the entire camera module, which is a very nice touch. But it's not the brightest, so it's not that visible when outdoors. I love the idea of this, but in order to customize it, you have to hit Settings, then to Shortcuts and Accessibility, then scroll until you find Dynamic Light. That's quite a process to get to one of the standout features of this device. Thankfully, there's a shortcut for it in the control center, but it doesn't show you all the different options. For some reason, you can't set the light to a static color, but you can choose from a few different effects, and there are a fair amount of color options. The good news is that the light can remain on the entire time, even when you lock your device. It can be used to react to different in-game actions, but it's limited to just a few games. However, you can customize the light to shine differently for battery, charging, music, calls, and notifications. But I can't understand why you can't set a specific color for a specific app. It would make sense to be able to set WhatsApp as green and Facebook as blue, for example, so that you know which app notifications you've received. But you can't do this at all. You're restricted to just one color for all your app notifications. Surely this isn't too hard to do, but maybe we'll get an update for it in the future. The front glass is now protected by Scott Sensation Alpha, the side frames are still made from aluminum, and the back plate is made from anti-glare glass, or glass fiber if you get the Alpha color variant. Alpha is slightly thinner and lighter than the other colors thanks to its back material, but all the colors offer better waterproofing than the iQOO 12. The iQOO 13 now offers an IP68 and IP69 certification, meaning it can be submerged 1.5 meters deep for 30 minutes and can also withstand high pressure water jets. And the cherry on top is that they have done away with the optical fingerprint scanner in favor of an ultrasonic sensor, which is more accurate and a lot faster thanks to it using sound waves instead of light to create a 3D image of your fingerprint. Again, there are quite a few upgrades with iQOO's latest flagship. But sit tight because there are still quite a few improvements over its predecessor, and one of the big ones is its new display. It's still a 10-bit LTPO AMOLED screen which can refresh between 1 and 144 Hz, but it now uses a BOE Q108T OLED panel material with noticeably slimmer bezels wrapping around it. It's now larger at 6.82 inches, pushes out more pixels thanks to a higher QHD resolution, offers better PWM dimming at 2592 Hz, now uses OLED circular polarization technology to help with eye comfort and reduce reflections, and is now quite a lot brighter with a peak brightness of 4500 nits. The iQOO 13 ships with FunTouch OS 15 out the box, which is based on Android 15, and that's a pretty big deal considering many other brands are still stuck on Android 14. You'll be getting 4 years of major software updates and 5 years of security updates, which is a year more than its predecessor, and the company guarantees 5 years of smooth software experience. Google is fully integrated in this global version, which includes Google Discover, Gemini and Gemini Live, Circle to Search, and AI image editing, but more importantly, the entire software experience has improved. You can still customize loads of different things, but the user interface is cleaner, there's now finally large folders, and overall the software just feels better and more in line with other flagships. As I mentioned at the start, there are some minor downgrades, and since the only thing we haven't touched on yet is cameras, I'm sure you can see where this is going. Thankfully, the selfie camera has actually seen a much needed upgrade this year. It's now a 32 megapixel camera with a 1 in 3.15 inch sensor size and a decent f2.45 aperture. And it takes much better snaps than last year's 16 megapixel sensor, and its edge detection is better too. Nighttime photos also come out decently, but portrait mode washes things out a bit. What's up guys, this is TechNick recording a 4K 60fps selfie video on the brand new iQOO 13, which is actually a pretty big step up from last year's iQOO iQOO 12, which was capped at 1080p 30fps selfie video recording. Let me know your thoughts of the video quality as well as the microphone performance. 4K 60fps selfie video is a pretty big deal, but unfortunately bokeh video is still limited to 1080p resolution, and overall selfie stability is a bit lackluster. Bokeh video is a bit grainy at night, but overall I'm quite pleased with the selfie video quality. There's no Zeiss partnership here like we've seen with many recent Vivo flagships, but there are very similar color styles to choose from. And these styles can be used with any of the rear cameras. Vivid strikes a nice balance, textured is a bit oversaturated, and natural looks a bit dull but arguably the most realistic. Vivid is the default mode and is probably what most would use, so that's what we'll stick to. Portrait mode comes out with great depth and edge detection whether you're using the main or telephoto camera, and while bokeh video is quite good, especially when using the telephoto, it's still unfortunately capped at 1080p resolution. The selfie camera is probably the only upgrade here though, as the ultra-wide camera is exactly the same. That being a 50 megapixel shooter with a 15mm focal length for a 119-degree field of view, but it still takes very detailed super macro photos and rather impressive shots of scenery. It takes decent images at night too, aside from some unpleasing light noise, and it can still record 4K 60fps ultra-wide video, which is filled with detail and offers smooth panning. Though nighttime recording is not exactly its strong suit, as it suffers from terrible light noise handling and has quite a bit of noise grain. I'm actually okay with the ultra-wide camera remaining the same, because it was already a pretty good sensor at this price point, but the main camera seems to have gone a bit backwards. It's still a 50 megapixel camera with OIS, and while it's using a newer IMX921 sensor, it has a smaller sensor size and a narrower aperture. That said, it still takes very pleasing daytime photos. I just feel like last year's sensor produced more detailed images. Using the main at night also came out looking decent overall, but it's extremely over-sharpened and struggles to handle light noise. Probably because it's a smaller sensor. There's still supermoon mode, which makes the moon stand out, and there's still astro mode, which is fun to play around with, but it's limited to just the main camera. There's of course 4K 60fps video recording, but again it looked a bit more detailed last year, and there's still ultra stabilization mode and 8K video recording, both of which can only be used with the main camera. Recording main camera video at night left me a bit disappointed, as last year's iQOO 12 produced very good 4K footage at night, but 8K video still comes out nice and detailed and managed to handle light noise a bit better than 4K. The main camera isn't exactly terrible, it's actually pretty decent, but it just feels like a bit of a downgrade from last year's sensor. What's probably the biggest letdown here, however, is the telephoto camera. It's now a 1 in 2.93 inch sized 50 megapixel IMX816 sensor with OIS and has an aperture of f1.85, which is actually a wider aperture than last year's, but it's a 2x telephoto camera, whereas last year's was a 3x periscope sensor, which used a larger half-inch sized 64 megapixel camera. But it's really not that bad at 2x optical zoom, aside from it looking slightly washed out from time to time, and 5x digital zoom actually looks quite good, but 10x and 30x zoom levels are questionable. The iQOO 12 looked incredible at these focal lengths, not to mention it could reach 100x zoom with impressive detail. This year the max zoom is 30x and quality is a bit of a letdown. Night shots weren't the best last year either, but at least it used its telephoto camera. This year, no matter what I tried, the camera system always reverted to the main camera for 2x and 5x focal length zooms. The telephoto was however used for 10x and 30x zoom ranges, but it didn't produce the best images. Supermoon mode is also still available for the telephoto, which is good to see, but daytime video didn't come out looking the best, and it's capped at 4K 30fps. There's no way of using 60fps with the telephoto camera at all, not even when setting the resolution to 1080p, which is a bummer considering its predecessor was capable of 4K 60fps periscope video. And as you'd expect, recording video at night with the telephoto sensor isn't exactly the best, but at least it didn't revert to the main camera. So if you're feeling a little underwhelmed with the iQOO 13's camera performance, you're not alone. After all, this camera system is identical to Vivo's budget-friendly V40 Pro smartphone. The iQOO 13's camera might disappoint some, but it's still very capable, and in my opinion is a very good strategic move to provide plenty other major upgrades while not really increasing the price. It has a better selfie camera, improved software and features, packs in a larger, brighter, higher resolution display, gets an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor, upgraded waterproofing, adds in a new RGB light around its camera module, has a much larger battery, better speakers, better haptic feedback, introduces 360-degree NFC, finally gets USB 3.2 speeds, and seriously overperforms in terms of gaming and benchmarks thanks to the new Snapdragon 8 Elite chipsets and iQOO's in-house made supercomputing chip, which are both kept cool thanks to a much improved cooling system. When you consider all of these upgrades, then a slightly worse camera system, lack of eSIM support and no wireless charging seem like some pretty small compromises for a very well-priced flagship smartphone. Let me know your thoughts of iQOO's best performing smartphone ever in the comment section down below. This is TechNick and I'll catch you in the next one.